Two doctors looked at a newborn child and wrote in their report that he would never walk properly, never play sport, and never live a normal life. Both doctors were wrong about everything. While the world was busy producing its greatest footballers in pristine academies and coached training grounds, the most devastating dribbler who ever lived was growing up barefoot on the muddy banks of a river, with legs that bent in opposite directions. The village of Pau Grande in the state of Rio de Janeiro was not a place of opportunity, it was a place of textile mills, hard labor, and small dreams, where most men worked until their bodies gave out. He was born in 1933, the seventh child of a father who drank and a mother who endured, into a world that offered almost nothing to a boy who arrived already marked as different. His spine curved, his left leg turned outward by 6 degrees, his right leg turned inward by 3, and his right leg was also 3.5 centimeters shorter than his left, a body assembled, it seemed, by accident. But the other children in Pau Grande were not looking at his legs, they were watching the ball, because even at 7 years old, the boy with the broken body moved with a grace that made no sense at all. The mill in Pau Grande had its own football team, and when the boy was old enough to work the looms, he was also old enough to play, but nobody wanted a player who looked like he might fall over walking to the pitch. He tried out for Botafogo in Rio de Janeiro as a teenager and waited for a response that never properly came, lost in the chaos of a club that did not know what to make of a boy who dribbled like an angel but stood like a question mark. For years he played for the mill team and for local clubs, dazzling everyone who saw him and going nowhere, while Brazil around him produced footballers who were signed, celebrated, and sent to Europe. If you have ever felt overlooked while giving everything you have, then you already understand something of what those years were like, and if stories like this one matter to you, follow Football Untold so you never miss the ones history tried to bury. There was also something else shadowing those years, alcohol, which moved through his family like a river current, and which he had begun to follow in the quiet hours when football was not enough to fill the emptiness. He was in his early 20s and still technically unsigned by a major club when his life should have already been charted, and yet something extraordinary was about to happen because one man finally paid attention. In 1953, Botafogo finally signed him properly, not because the club had changed its mind, but because a scout named Arati had watched one training session and immediately told the directors they were looking at something that did not have a name yet. From the moment he put on the black and white of Botafogo, it was immediately clear to everyone watching that the laws of football that applied to every other human being did not apply to him. He would take the ball to the byline, stop completely, wait for the defender to commit, and then go past him anyway, sometimes the same defender 2 or 3 times in the same move, as if daring him to try again. The great poet and novelist Nelson Rodriguez called him the angel with bent legs, and for the crowds of Rio de Janeiro who packed into Maracana and every other ground, he was exactly that, something sent from elsewhere. Then came the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, where Brazil arrived with a team of extraordinary talent, but it was the winger from Pau Grande who nobody outside Brazil had heard of that the world was about to be introduced to. In the quarterfinal against Wales, with the score level and Brazil desperate, he collected the ball on the right wing and within 4 seconds had made 3 defenders look like they had never played the game in their lives. Brazil won the World Cup in 1958, and a 17-year-old named Pelé received much of the celebration, but those who were there said the winger from Pau Grande was the soul of what they had just witnessed. 4 years later in Chile at the 1962 World Cup, something happened that football had never seen before and has never truly seen since, a single player so dominant that he effectively won a World Cup by himself. When Pelé was injured in the first game and left the tournament, the rest of the world assumed Brazil would struggle. Instead, the man from Pau Grande took the World Cup and carried it on his bent legs all the way to the final. He scored twice in the semi-final against Chile and twice in the final against Czechoslovakia, and throughout the entire tournament he was not on the losing side in a single minute of play, a record that still stands today. The Czech defenders who faced him in the final were asked afterward what it was like, and one of them said simply that they had tried to mark him but quickly realized it was like trying to hold onto water. He was voted the player of the tournament in 1962, and the Brazilian public worshipped him with an intensity that made even the national team itself feel secondary. He was not a footballer to them, he was a saint of the street. But the same city that adored him on Saturday afternoons offered him nothing on Monday mornings, and the chaos of his private life, the drinking, the women, the restless wandering, was beginning to cost him everything. By the time the 1966 World Cup arrived in England, his body had been consumed by the life he had lived, the alcohol had damaged his liver, his legs had been operated on multiple times, and at 32 years old he looked and moved like a much older man. Brazil were eliminated early and the era was over, not just for the team but for the whole philosophy of football that he had represented, the idea that pure individual joy could defeat organized modern systems. He retired and the world moved on quickly, as it always does, to the next brilliant thing, but those who had watched him in his prime never found adequate language to describe what they had seen. He died in January of 1983 at just 49 years old, his liver destroyed by decades of drinking, and on the day of his funeral the streets of Rio de Janeiro filled with people who wept as if they had lost something irreplaceable because they had. Pelé said he was the greatest player he ever saw. Johan Cruyff said no one before or after moved with a ball the way he did. And yet outside Brazil, most of the world has half forgotten a man who deserved to be remembered above almost everyone. The boy from Pau Grande who was never supposed to walk, who was never supposed to play, who was never supposed to matter, won 2 World Cups, never lost an international game in his entire career, and remains the most joyful footballer who ever pulled on a pair of boots. And if his story moved you, follow Football Untold because there are 100 more like it waiting to be told.